Teaching skills, elicitation and task setting. Hello, how's everything going so far? At this point in your course, you've had a lot of information about some of the big areas which influence the way we teach. Here, you can see some of the main topics we've already explored: interaction, ZPD, scaffolding, L1 and L2 acquisition, teacher roles, manner and voice, groupings and interaction patterns, processes of development, and stages of development. By now, you should be starting to get a pretty good overview of the main aspects of methodology and classroom practice. And if you have time, why not spend a while with another teacher in your group to review and possibly mind map some of the big topics, seeing how they join up to create a coherent image of the teaching learning process. But for now, let's take a look at two things that teachers do a lot of in the classroom: elicitation and setting up tasks and activities. We'll begin with elicitation, thinking about what it is, why it's useful, and how to do it. What is elicitation? Elicitation describes a range of techniques that teachers use for learners to discover and provide ideas information instead of telling it to them. Before we begin, think about these three questions and make some notes. Why is elicitation useful? What can you elicit from learners? And what elicitation techniques can teachers use? Pause the video for a moment, and when you're ready, click to continue. Why is eliciting useful? Elicitation is about getting learners to interact using English. We can take elicitation as a kind of verbal prompting to encourage learners to initiate, respond, and interact using the language. It's useful for a number of things. It helps create an interactive and more learner-centered classroom. It gets the learners involved and engaged in the lesson. It makes it more memorable. It builds on the learner's collective existing knowledge. It can help with linking old and new information, which is essential for learning. It promotes learning through self-discovery. And it helps you, the teacher, find out what learners know and don't know. What can you elicit? Elicitation as a form of prompting means teachers can direct questions to individual learners. This provides useful feedback about how well each child has understood the new language or the content. Elicitation can provide us with evidence of language awareness, meaning, use, and form. And elicitation can prompt children to share their ideas, experiences, opinions, and feelings about the content. For example, a reaction to the story or the song you've introduced in class. Elicitation techniques, question and answer. It's obvious to say that elicitation isn't like a real conversation. It's largely teacher-centered, meaning it's managed and directed by the teacher, calling on individual students or groups of students to respond. But when it's used well, elicitation can significantly increase the amount of learner output. One of the key techniques that teachers use is the question and answer sequence. So here are some examples of question types and questions that a teacher would say or could say in the classroom. Pause for a moment. Can you match the question types 1 to 5 with the examples A to E? That should have been quite easy. So let's briefly check your answers, and I've color-coded them to make it easier to point out. So number 1, WH questions. The example was D. What kind of food should they eat? 2, yes/no questions. The answer was E. Should they eat spicy food? 3, incomplete sentence, meaning the learner completes the sentence for you. The answer was A. You should feed your dog. 4, either/or questions. The answer here was C. Should they eat spicy or plain food? 5, rising intonation. Spicy food? The point here is that each type of question demands a certain amount from the learner. Some are easier for lower level learners to answer than others. Closed questions, such as yes or no, either or questions, are significantly easier to answer than others. Here are some more elicitation techniques. Question and answer is just one way to elicit or prompt learners to contribute, to demonstrate their understanding, and to use language meaningfully. But some other common techniques are, for example, act it out, mime, use a picture or object, use examples, use a mind map, brainstorm in groups or as a class, give students time to think, and praise all efforts and contributions. The important thing is that you listen to what the student says, not only the language that they use to say it. Clearly, language is important, but we should show that we value their contribution. Here's something to think about. Hands up or call out. One reason we elicit is to ensure an even level of participation. We want to make sure that we systematically call on all our learners to contribute, to give an answer, an opinion, or share an idea in class. Not only the stronger, more confident learners, but the quieter or shyer students too. But young children find it difficult to resist calling out. Even if it's not their turn, they often feel excited to know the answer and they want to be the first to speak. So basically, we have two main options. Everyone calls out answers, or they put their hands up and the teacher selects an individual student to answer. But what are the advantages and disadvantages of each? Pause for a moment and think about what your response is in your own classroom. We're not going to dwell too much on it here, but it's something you should share and discuss with your group later. So now let's move on to our second topic, which is setting up tasks and activities. And the first question we want to answer is, what characterizes effective task instructions? In previous input, you saw that setting up tasks and activities requires careful planning. This helps to ensure that learners know what is expected of them in terms of what they need to do, how long they have, who they'll work with, and, importantly, why they are doing it. But what characterizes effective task setting? We often refer to the 4 C's of task setting. Pause for a moment. Can you work out what each one stands for? Each dash represents a letter. When you're ready, click to continue. So here are the 4 C's of task setting. This is a useful list to keep in hand while you're planning how you set up and manage learning activities in your classrooms. Task instructions should be clear, concise, complete, and checked. And in the following sections, we're going to look at these a little bit more deeply. So let's start by considering the logical order in which we would set up tasks in English with younger learners. Logical sequencing. A recipe for instructions. The following are typical steps that teachers take when giving task instructions, but they're not in the correct order. So your task is to put them in the logical sequence. Pause the video and click to continue when you're ready, and then we'll discuss each one and clarify. So the first step is to make sure that you have all your learners' attention. And there are some techniques. Okay, thank you. Eyes on me. You could use a signal. Put your hands on your head and wait, for example. Clap out a pattern, which the class must clap back. Or you could count down. Give me 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. With a little training, learners quickly catch on, and it can be quite a fun way of drawing their attention. So now that you've got their attention, you should provide a logical link for your task. Basically, you're linking what they're going to do with something they've already done or did before in a previous lesson. This helps make the activity more coherent. There are a number of techniques for doing this. Now that you've completed the activity, you're going to. This provides the lesson with a nice flow, and it makes the reason for the activity clearer, and it helps learners think about the context. You have their attention, you've given them some context for what they're going to do, and now you should set up the interactions and groupings. So explicitly tell learners how to interact and who to work with. For example, talk in pairs or work in groups. You can use gestures, small hand signals to indicate groups or working together. Next, give a clear and simple description of what the learners will do. It can help a lot to script and rehearse your instructions. Especially important to keep your instructions simple and economical, remembering that if you're giving instructions in English, the language needs to be comprehensible in some way. Slow down your speech and pause strategically. That's quite important. Don't make your instructions like a narrative. Use imperatives, backup meaning, using gestures. Only include the essential information. Don't overload them with unnecessary details. You could also elicit instructions for familiar or obvious tasks. Also, don't repeat yourself. Say it once. And give instructions for one step at a time, not the whole thing. Young learners particularly need to know what they're going to do right now rather than what they're going to do later. Another way that you can help yourself is to give the instructions before you give any handouts or materials. The reason is that once you've given them the material, they will be distracted and focused on that material. Some will start work immediately. I'm sure you've noticed if you taught already. Verbal instructions are important, but you should also demonstrate the activity with the student or elicit an example. This is often called a worked example. Let's do an example together, you can say. For a handout, you could point to the task, check that all learners are following you, and know where on the handout to look or write their answers. But don't give that handout yet for the reason I've just explained. Next, you want to check that your students have understood what it is they have to do, who they're going to work with, and how long they have. So, confirm the instructions with the whole class. Focus on key parts which you think may be causing confusion. This should be quite quick though, enough to be sure that learners know what's expected. Use questions. For example, who's your partner? Are you going to talk or write? What are you going to think quietly about? What will the winner do? Where will you write the words? By this point, learners should be pretty clear and quite eager to start. So, give them the materials or the handout that they need. And try to be efficient. Have the materials ready to distribute. Make sure learners have the coursebook page open and the other materials they'll need, pencils, crayons, whatever. Put the handout upside down so that everyone starts at the same time. This is a good technique because starting together means they're more likely to finish together. And we all know how difficult it can be to manage faster learners against slower learners. Use classroom monitors or group leaders to help you distribute the materials. You don't need to do everything yourself. It's a best policy to involve the children wherever possible. They like to be involved in the life of the class, and they like to feel useful. Next, you want to set a time limit and be clear. Tell them exactly how long they have. Sometimes people use egg timers, countdown timers, clocks, alarms, all kinds of things. You need to remind learners of the time as they're going to keep them on track. And be prepared to deal with faster finishers. Have short, easy to set up extension tasks ready to maintain engagement and focus. We've talked before about this. Make sure those tasks are very easy for you to set up and don't involve you needing to give additional instruction or lots of feedback and correction. So now you've gone through many stages of setting up the task, and you should use a signal so they know when they can begin. Beginning together means learners are more likely to finish together. You could count down, for example, or some teachers are more novel and they use systems such as traffic lights or other devices to signal start and finish times. And that's where your work really begins, because while the students are doing the task, you need to monitor and make sure they all know what to do, providing on-task support. So circulate and help them. Praise them if they're doing well. It's good practice to talk to students at eye level, not loom over them. Tell students how much time they have left, and extend the task for those who finish early. So there you have it, a simple, logical recipe for setting up tasks and activities in your classroom. So let's briefly review the steps to make sure that we're giving clear, concise, complete, and checked instructions. 1. Make sure you have all your learners' attention. 2. Provide a logical link or context for your task. 3. Set up the interactions and groupings. 4. Give a clear and simple description of what the learners will do right now. For a handout activity, point to the task and check that all learners can follow you. Demonstrate the activity with a student or elicit an example on the board. 5. Check your instructions. 6. Give students the materials or the handout. Keep those face down. 7. Set a time limit. 8. Use a signal for when they can start. 9. Monitor and make sure all learners know what to do. Now that we've had a look at the logical sequencing, let's consider some typical language that teachers use. Read the following instructions and pause the video. In your notes, match each instruction to one of the steps, 1 to 9. When you're ready, click to continue and then check your answers. So let's quickly review. So number 1, make sure you have all your learners' attention. Okay everybody, eyes on me. 2. Provide a logical link or context for your task. You listened to 2 friends talking about a movie. Now you're going to do the same. 3. Set up the interactions and groupings. Work in pairs. You two, you two, you two. 4. Give a clear and simple description of what the learners will do. Ask and answer these questions about the last movie you saw. 5. Check your instructions. Who is your partner? Lucy? What are you going to talk about? Is he right? 6. Give students the materials and handout. 7. Set a time limit. You have 3 minutes. 8. Use a signal for when they can start. Ready, steady, go. So you've considered the logical sequence of giving effective task instructions, but let's think about a few things you should avoid. First, avoid having students repeat the whole instruction. It's just a waste of time and it becomes a memory activity. So focus on key parts which you think may cause confusion. Avoid giving obvious information. For example, check your answers with your partner so you can see if they have the same answers, and then we'll discuss the answers together. And avoid relying on written instructions on the page, worksheet, or PowerPoint slide. Always give verbal instructions where necessary. You need to check, because even if you think it's obvious, some students will start by doing the wrong thing, and then you'll need to restart the task later. So be prepared for that. Summing up. So in this input, we've briefly focused on some fundamental teaching skills, and the areas we've covered will help you to create a positive learning environment which is more learner-centered and maximizes the opportunities for meaningful interaction. Specifically, we've looked at these two areas. Elicitation. Using questioning and other techniques, we can prompt our learners to speak out using English. Elicitation is a form of restricted interaction led by the teacher. We use it to focus on language, content, or personal attitudes and feelings towards ideas and information. And then we looked at task setting. When we use English to set up tasks and activities, you should plan your instructions carefully in advance and focus on the 4 C's: clear, concise, complete, and checked. If possible, focus on how you elicit and set up tasks in your next lesson. Use the information in this input and plan carefully. As before, you're going to discuss this input in the next group discussion, and by now you should be familiar with what you need to do to prepare. So, organize your notes and highlight the key information, concepts, and terms you've learned, and prepare your questions and any comments that you want to raise with your group. If you were able to incorporate these ideas in your teaching practice, make some notes of any insights that you want to share or any techniques that you used which weren't mentioned here. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.